Let me say a quick thank you for having us back. My wife and I pinch ourselves, or because it's more fun, we pinch each other every time we're going to get to come back to Sun Valley. So to meet old friends and new friends, and also a chance for me to say thank you to all the wonderful viewers of the PBS NewsHour. So thank you for that. The title of our talk, I take no credit for it, but Dave Eggers' Word and Deed. As John said, there is really no writer that we know of in our world today who lives and combines so deeply both word and deeds. He's a very unusual and special figure in our culture today. And my goal here for the next hour is, for those of you who maybe know one side of Dave's work, we can introduce you to the other, and vice versa. And if there are those of you who don't know enough or anything about Dave Eggers, I want you to know more by the end of this hour, okay? So we know each other a bit. We've done this a little bit before. We've had a chance to talk a number of times, but it's nice to talk to you again.
Thank you.
And one thing that I didn't know about you personally is that you have a deep connection to this region.
Yeah, my in-laws, Paul and Inger Vida, are you guys here? Where are you? Oh, there they are. So they've been coming here since 1980 and bought a condo and have been coming ever since and spending some winters and summers, and my wife Vendela spent much of her childhood here. So when I came here 19 years ago was the last time I came to the conference. We've been coming. We're here one season a year, no matter what. And
the conference has changed a little since then, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Because this is quite an extraordinary setting.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think this is really, the people that put on this conference tirelessly and I think with real inspiration deserve so much thanks for doing so and growing it. But yeah, I've come to love Idaho so much, and we drive all the way around. We'll go to McCall one day, and we spend a lot of time up in Redfish, and we do the dune buggies down that you can rent in Bellevue, and we do a lot of fishing, and did the paragliding. I'm looking at those guys. I'm seeing two paragliders, and I did that. They're not going to land on us. I think everyone's like turning around. But I did that last time, which off of Baldy, and that will make you sick really quickly. Like, I had an Estonian guide. He was my guy, and he thought I wanted to just go in circles for an hour, which I didn't know how to. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I was going to throw up on him, but
this is amazing. I've never sat in a place to have a conversation like this where I can see.
We can see two paragliders.
We can see the paragliders coming toward us. Don't turn around.
Yeah. I know.
Okay, we'll let you know if you're in danger.
Look at there. Nothing to see.
But is place important to you in both as person and as writer?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a suburb, but with a creek running behind us, and we thought we were growing up in a sort of Huckleberry Finn sort of way, because we would, get in inner tubes and go down the creek in the winter and the summer. And this was suburban Chicago, but there is a lot of open land there, if you could believe it. And but there's nothing like Idaho, and I think I always call it the Switzerland of the United States in terms of just how pristine the land is, how much open space, how you can just sort of pick a hill and walk over it. And there's more to do than you can possibly get done. And we're here all month. We've been here since July 2nd, and we've chipped away at like a tiny bit of the list of things that we wanted to do. But I also have to give a shout out to the gold mine. I'm wearing gold mine boots. I've only been reading gold mine books this month. I got a book there called Ask a North Korean, and it's a book of like North Korean defectors talking about their lives inside the Republic. And so I love to buy old, 50-cent books in places like this. But I bought these 10 years ago, and they were probably 20 years old then. And it cost me $8. And I keep super glue with me. I have it in my bag because the soles need some help so often. But otherwise, they've held up incredibly. I think the gold mine is maybe the best retail opportunity in the world. It's my favorite place.
This is shameless promotion. I mean,
yeah, I know, right?
You're looking to be outfitted by the gold mine for the future, right?
Can I make one more promotion? Oh, I'm going to do it later. Sorry, we're way off topic, maybe.
To get back on topic of place, it takes us to your new novel. Because what's most interesting, one of the interesting aspects of the parade, and we'll tell you a little bit more about it as we talk here, but it's set in no place, in a way. A place that we don't know the name. We have two main characters, we don't know their names.
Yeah. Well, I wanted it to be kind of placeless and timeless, because I think the story at the core could take place anywhere at any time, and has taken place, and the essence of it has happened again and again. But it did start, Valentino Deng and I went back, we've been back to South Sudan many times, but the second time we went back, he was scouting locations for a school that he set up after What is the What came out, and he runs a primary and secondary school in his hometown of Mariel Bay in the Bahr el Ghazal region of South Sudan. And this is an area where the illiteracy rate for women is about 96%. And so his mission is to educate young women, and he's had so many challenges along the way because so many young women are married off at 13 and 14. And so he's had to innovate and almost conspire with all of these maybe counterintuitive ideas about how do you keep girls in school when their value to the family for the bride price is much higher if they're married off right away. And so he has these campuses that are all girls. He sort of builds fences around them. He has guards. He has to keep the girls on campus sleeping overnight so that they don't have to go home and work, and that they aren't married off. And he's, Valentino Deng, besides going through incredible hardship during the civil war in South Sudan and 13 years in refugee camps, he's emerged as one of the global visionaries in education in post-conflict zones. And I encourage you to look up his work, because the government of South Sudan, since the country became independent of Sudan, it's still, like any new country, is having a lot of trouble getting on its feet. But one thing is that when it comes to education, they know that he's the guy that gets stuff done. Mm-hmm. So recently, there was a school that a British nonprofit had opened and closed very quickly. They didn't know how to do it. It's a very difficult country for any NGO. And so they gave it back to the government. They pulled out, and the government didn't know what to do with this big campus. And they just said, Valentino, you're the only guy that can get it done. And they gave him the school to run, and he had it filled about 6 weeks later with 400 young women. So when you see a visionary and he's 10 steps ahead and you can recognize that with somebody that just gets stuff done. But that's a long tangent. Valentino and I were scouting locations for one of the campuses back in 2006, and we saw in the middle of really, a very lightly populated part of South Sudan, this maybe 6-lane road being built. Mm-hmm. And it was just they had just cleared it out, and you could see the homes that they had picked up and moved to the side of the road to make way for it. And
like a superhighway in the middle of nowhere.
A superhighway. It was, going from the south all the way to, connecting to roads that connected to Khartoum in the north. And I expected there to be like maybe not a Sudanese paving crew or road crew, but maybe a Kenyan or Tanzanian or Ugandan, some contractor from the region. But when we found the machinery and all these guys in uniform, they were Swedish. And I thought, why would the government of, this was a joint project, why would the government of Sudan and South Sudan hire a Swedish contracting team? And I started being fascinated with contractors in very far from home, whether they're building ports or whether they're building airports, highways, railways, in other parts of the world, where the motives of the commissioning body, whether it's a government or a multinational, their motives and their plans for that project are way beyond the understanding by design of the contractors, the companies and the people on the ground. And so I started seeing the same thing, like strange, combinations of contracting companies from, the Philippines in Saudi Arabia, or a lot of Chinese infrastructure building in Africa. Their Belt and Road project is all over the world, and we have yet to see or to know fully their plans, why they are building and owning all of these really valuable infrastructure projects all over the world. And meanwhile, there's these people that are there building these things on the ground, whether, and in this case, in the parade, there's 2 pavers. They just operating a paving machine to pave the road, and little do they know that they are pawns in a game way beyond their understanding.
But this is a story that you witnessed some time back, that stayed with you, and it somehow becomes the stuff for a novel.
Yeah, I think sometimes the idea, for me, the gestation period is maybe 6 years on average, and this was 13 maybe.
13 years?
Yeah, I took notes then, and it just kept staying with me, and then when I saw other versions of it in other countries, it kept on staying with me. And John was saying backstage that you can have these ideas for years and years, and you haven't arrived at the right vessel or the right form to put them in. And I did a draft of the parade maybe 5 years ago, and I set it aside, and then I came back, and I still liked it.
But then why, if it is so grounded in a particular place, down to even knowing that it's the Swedish contractors, in the novel, you don't give us the name of the place, you don't even give us the name of the contractors. And in fact, I must say, in reading it, I just was assuming that they were Americans.
Right, because you're an arrogant American. You just assume it's about you.
Thank you, Dave. Our discussion is done here.
I promised Jeff I was going to pretend to be outraged at some point by some question, and that's as close as I'm going to come.
Okay.
Just to liven it up. No, I think, I would like if this were, the Italian edition of the book comes out in a few weeks, and I want Italians to think it's about Italians.
Yeah.
And I would want a Chinese reader to think it's about their work abroad. And I want a Nigerian reader
well
to
be, huh?
Yeah. There's Nigerian contracting companies all over Africa too, and I would want a Nigerian reader to think it's about their work in, even in Ghana. I would want. I think it isn't just about American soft power or imperialism at all, because we are in an era where the Chinese are expressing soft power much more than we are, and they're the ones that are building the infrastructure of the world. And so it's a phenomenon that, it's not specific to the US at all, but we are so self-centered in a way where we think all the evil of the world is our fault, or all the great things in the world are our fault. And generally, we need to remember that we are one of many nations, and that there are these things are acted out by in so many other sort of combinations of countries and in every other region. So that's why I took away any sort of anything that made it seem like it was an American company, anything that made it seem like it was even a Western company, and but we are all sort of ruled by our inherent biases, I guess.
But then it also has the quality of a parable. If you don't have the specific names of places and people, it takes it a little bit out of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that there's anything in it that's time sensitive at all, you know? And so I would hope, I like every so often you have that urge to write something that's almost timeless or purportedly timeless or hopefully timeless. And because I write so much stuff that is really hyper-specific to our time and place, I thought for a change, maybe explore, something that 10 years from now would feel like it was just as fresh as today. Who knows if... But that's why I set it aside for 5 years or however many years. I wanted to come back to it and see if it still had any sort of grip and relevance. And so at my age, I have the time and I'm slow enough in general where I do tend to set everything aside for a year or two and be able to come back to it with a cold editorial eye and make sure it's worthwhile.
And a lot of the books are tied to big issues or things going on in the world, right? I mean, do you start out wanting to, I'm thinking of social media with the Circle or what you referred to earlier, the decline of manufacturing and hologram, right? Do you start out with that kind of need for investigation?
Sometimes it comes from a place of outrage.
Outrage?
Books take so long to write, and I'm so inherently lazy about writing that I've been trying to write in this cabin we have in Warm Springs, and I sit in the writing position for 7-8 hours a day.
You want to show us?
I work on a couch with my feet up and the laptop here, and no phone or Wi-Fi, but I sit in that position when I'm not reading Ask a North Korean for 7 hours, and I get maybe 45 minutes of work done. And so it's a terrible sedentary life, you know? And so I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but because it takes so long and you waste so much time, there does have to be some sort of fire in the belly where you feel like, okay, if I do this, and if I finish it, and if it comes to anything, there might be impact. And you might change a mind or two. And so...
But that's an interesting approach for a novelist, I think. I mean, impact can be readers read my novel and readers got something and enjoyed the experience, the literary experience of reading. You're talking about impact in a different way, I think.
Well, no, so Barry Lopez spoke a few days ago at the library. Did anybody go to that? It was one of the great talks I've ever seen in my life, and Barry Lopez, every word he says is like chiseled in stone. And so I learned so much from that, and he articulated it in a way that I felt like, okay, that makes sense, is that if you're going to act as a novelist today or any day, and if you're not concerned with the future of the planet and the health of the human soul, what's the point in doing it? You know, I mean, if you're just moving words around. I think that you do, to get up every morning and undertake that and sort of put in all that effort and kill so many trees, you know, there has to be some kind of purpose, I think. And it doesn't mean that it has to be, you know, a bludgeon or a telegram, you know, Hemingway's old phrase, if you want to send a message, send a telegram, you know. But at the same time, we as novelists, I think we do have goals for some sort of impact or message or an edifying kind of, you know, purpose for the book, even if you do care about the sentences and you have to, you know, deeply care about the craft and create something beautiful too. I think that I need both of those, and I need some sort of, and I like to go reporting too. So that's why I like to have an excuse to go to Syria or an excuse to go to Saudi Arabia and interview people and get to know them and have my expectations upended and be educated, because I know nothing. You know, I know so little that, I just enjoy that excuse. And that's why I love to talk to young aspiring journalists, because I think there's no better life. You know this. You get to interview people for a living and explore your, whatever interests you. And the same thing could be that way with the young writers that we work with. And you talked about this circle, and I want to mention something because talk about outrage. So this is my new outrage, if you'd like to hear it. So how many of you guys have kids in school, K through 8? Had kids in school? Were kids in school?
Know any children?
No children, have seen children, are aware that they exist. So I've been working, we have these nonprofits called 826 Valencia, 826 National. So we work with students in the written word and to sort of elevate and celebrate, amplify their voices. And in the last 15, 20 years, we've been up against this movement for increased money that goes to STEM and engineering and science and technology, which is totally necessary. But it has, in a lot of ways, come at the expense of the humanities and especially concentration on writing. But there's a combination of these two things that has recently started happening, which is a lot of standardized tests at a lot of different age groups, 4th grade, 7th grade, high school. They have essay portions where the kids type their words into a box on a computer. You guys know about this? So they're asked to answer to a prompt. And ever since these questions have existed and education has existed, humans have graded these essays.
Makes sense.
To determine whether or not young people have facility and competence in writing. In the last 10, 15 years, there's been a slew of companies that have quietly grown and made many tens and hundreds of millions of dollars developing algorithms that supposedly do an equal or better job of grading human writing than humans do. And so I've been working on studying this, and there's a lot of these programs out there that you can go on their website and submit an essay and see how it comes out. So I submitted a bunch, and there's one called Peg Writing, and it's graded on a scale of 1 to 5, and then there's different bars for different parts of the different aspects of your essay. I put 12 Pulitzer Prize winning essayists into this program. None of them scored over a 4.1. First of all, Peggy Noonan scored a 3.8. I put Orwell's Politics in the English Language in. Do you guys aware of this essay? That sort of the essay about
writing clearly,
and sort of and a real sledgehammer to mealy-mouthed or superfluous verbiage and all those ideas that sort of went into newspeak in 1984. But his Politics in the English Language scored a 3.6. And this is all, you can choose which grade level you want to be tested at. This was the 11th grade level. So Orwell's essay, which is considered kind of the hallmark, the benchmark for essays about writing, scored a 3.6. I put Obama's speech on race when he was campaigning in 2008. I put that in, and he scored 3.7. And the great thing about this is that the computers cannot read. I don't know, I had to be educated about this myself, but they cannot read. And it even says, the software says that the computers cannot read. But so they search for keywords. And the bigger words you use, and the more of those large words, long words you use, your score goes up. And so you can I put in Obama's speech, and he got 3.6, and so I started to game it. And I would put it in again with just big words, inserted at random, with no articles or no prepositions, nothing. and I ginned it up every single time.
Wow.
So I got up to like a 4.1, and then they said, they give you suggestions, and one of them was, how about more transitional words? So they give you a lot of extra points if you use moreover, consequently, however, therefore. They list the words. So I put in 30 or 40 of those. Every sentence. 4.6 I got up to. In the end, I created this Frankenstein essay that makes no sense. There's not one sentence that tracks.
Yeah.
And it was graded significantly higher by, he started at a B- and he got up to an A+.
Yeah. And you got into Stanford.
And I got into Stanford. So, but if there are teachers out there or anybody with any influence, just know the teachers I know weren't aware of this. So this is standard in a lot of states where all of the students' standardized tests are graded by machines, the essays. And the states will not advertise that this is being done. Yeah. So we wrote letters to every state superintendent of education to find out. And we've gotten maybe 14 letters back. Yeah. And the majority of them have some blending where they say some of them are human graded, some are graded by machines, and they won't tell you what percentage. Yeah. And meanwhile, we've gotten even like the contracts from these grading companies. Their contract last year for Utah was $49 million. Wow. Are you outraged? All right, good. So we got that going.
But this is a good, it's a good segue into the work you do that I want everybody to know more about. Teaching, working literacy, reading and writing programs for young people, right?
Yeah. Well,
and there's any number of them. If you go on to Dave's website, I guess it's yours, daveeggers.net, right? That's you? I don't know who keeps that up. But it's an extraordinary website because you see all kinds of photos of every different kind of activity that he's involved in, and including all the 826 and the scholar match. So let's talk a little bit about these things.
Well, Erica back there, if you could start that first slide. I don't know, has anybody been to this place? All right, so my mom was a teacher, and a lot of my friends became teachers in San Francisco, and they were the ones that I still talk to about issues like this, like the robo-grading. But we started this center. They kept saying if they couldn't keep all of their students at grade level, especially English language learners or those students falling behind. And they said if they could just clone themselves, they could reach all of the students they wanted to and do the writing assignments that they wanted to, and make sure every student felt confident every day. Mm-hmm. So we sort of created a place where we could take volunteers, have the teachers help train them. We would support the teachers in all of their projects and make sure that the kids got the one-on-one attention that they created, but that they wanted. But we rented this space in San Francisco, but it was zoned for retail. So the landlord said, you can do your nonprofit, but in the front, you got to sell something. So we did market research, and we realized there wasn't a place to buy affordably priced pirate supplies. So this is a pirate supply store for the working buccaneer. It's not like it's not for tourists, or like if you think pirates are cute. It's you got your union card, and you need the supplies. And so if you lose an eyeball, these are all made in Germany. These are real replacement eyeballs, and these are like the care of your replacement eyeball, all of the stuff that you might need. These are eye patches for everyday use, and then the pastels are for, special occasions and christenings and bar mitzvahs. So we opened this place, and then behind is the writing and tutoring center. So this is just a lo-fi place, quiet, where kids can get extra help every day. But the retail part brought people in. Mm-hmm. In a way that I always talk about collapsible space from that passage from Valentino. The education, so often there is this high wall between what's going on in the school and the community at large. Yeah. But there's so much help there. And there's so many people that have time, In a community like this, I'm sure there's a lot of volunteerism in the schools, but you need conduits where people can be useful.
Yeah.
And so we created this space, but then the other thing with the pirate store is that it actually made money. So it pays the rent on the building, and we have an actual pirate supply manager, and all she does is like keep up with the latest trends in piracy, and what they're wearing, how puffy the shirts are this season, all that. Yeah. We don't do the R.
You don't do the R?
No, that's cartoonish.
Oh, excuse me.
It's subtle, but you'll catch on. So. And this is a space in San Francisco, there was a liquor store in the Tenderloin district called Big Boy Liquor that was like a blight on that neighborhood for decades. And the city wanted to get rid of it. So they said, landlord, unless you want to be in a lot of trouble, give up, you're going to have 826 Valencia as your next tenant. So we took over this space at Golden Gate in Leavenworth, where it's a very troubled neighborhood. There's a lot of amazing families, 4,000 kids there, a lot of immigrants that came over in the 60s and 70s from Vietnam, Cambodia, now Yemen. It's one of the largest concentrations of Yemeni families. And, but there's a lot of like drug dealing, open drug use every day, all day. But we wanted to make a safe haven for the kids. So one of the kids said, what we should have in there is a tree fort. So we created a tree fort. That's a functioning tree fort in the Tenderloin. And the idea always is to create unnecessarily beautiful spaces for kids to feel at home and feel that they are understood, that they'll be listened to, that they'll get the help that they need. And the great thing about the storefronts is that they destigmatize what could be a place you go after school. If it says the place where kids get extra help who need it, who are falling behind, no kid wants to be there. They're already feeling on the margins. They're stigmatized in so many ways, especially recent arrivals from a lot of cities. So the last thing you want to do that. But the pirate store, and this is King Carl's Emporium, which is a long story. It's a puffer fish that travels around and he brings back things from his travels and then he sells them. But then you have the tree fort. So this kept on growing. This is the space in Mission Bay that just opened about 2 months ago, where we have local designers. They create these beautiful spaces. But it started growing. In New York, they wanted to have one, but they didn't have a pirate market there. And so they created the Brooklyn Superhero Supply Company, where, crime fighters go for all of their gear. It's like a Costco for crime fighters, stripped down. But you can get your cape tested. It's industrial fans that will blow and make sure your cape doesn't bunch. And then this is the back wall, which is actually a secret door you see on the right that leads to the tutoring center. You can see how old this picture is with the max, and it has the time in all 5 boroughs of New York and the back. And then this grew to LA. This is a time travel mart, 7-Eleven for time travelers. Whenever you are, we're already then. And it looks so much like a 7-Eleven that every day people come in for Slurpees and detergent and stuff like that. But in the back.
I asked you at the beginning about how important place is for you.
Yeah.
I didn't realize we were going.
Every time,
every place has its specific in.
So kids understand when they're working in a cheap space. Or an industrial space. I was in a high school in Minneapolis a few months ago that in the 70s, a lot of these spaces were designed by the same people that designed prisons. And this high school, South High School, which is an amazing place, a big public school, insanely diverse, totally, they've just defied the space that they're in. There's no windows. And it's built like a panopticon. It's round, so that ostensibly guards in the middle could see what was going on. So it's horrifying in its architecture, but they've been able to sort of humanize it. But kids get it. If they're surrounded by cinder blocks, they get it. But if they're given a glorious space that says you matter and the voice that you're going to express within this space matters, we're going to lift it up, they get it. And so this is a beautiful space in the back of the Time Travel Mart. But the idea, this is the Greater Boston Bigfoot Research Institute. Makes no sense whatsoever. But always one-on-one attention with the kids in a very low-key. This is in Shoreditch in London, the Hoxton Street Monster Supply Company, where they have products like this, a vague sense of unease, And we always have products, too, that the kids can help create, the volunteers create, so it sort of creates this entire sort of three-dimensional feeling that whatever creative spirit they have will be honored there, and if they learn differently, they're going to be understood there.
Okay, but sort of kidding aside, I mean, this has become a national project, national movement. What's the big idea? I mean, why are you doing this?
It started as a neighborhood center in the Mission District. That was the only idea.
Yeah.
And I thought it was only from 2:30 to 6. And after school tutoring, so the McSweeney staff used to have to quit at 3 and tutor whoever came in. But then we had other tutors. It grew very quickly, and the services kind of expanded because, like any nonprofit, if you're ever going to start one, you say, you have a vague idea, but you let the community that you serve determine the scope and nature of those services and the depth of it, and you let them shape it over time. So it's changed so much. And every city, there is one of these centers, and there's about 48 around the world now. They go to Melbourne, Stockholm. We didn't do them. We started the first few. Everything after that is local communities. And I got to show this one.
Okay.
Because this is in Rotherham, north of England. And there's a town that went through some rocky times. They had some horrific things happen involving violence and children. Anyway, they took over this old bar that used to be a department store, beautiful old building. And they built this. It actually has a slide. This is where the kids get to write. This is the teen room. So the teen room, can you see that this is a series of toilets? Not functioning toilets, but it's so unbelievably unnecessarily beautiful that in this really it's a tough working class old coal mining town that has fallen on hard times, but these kids, they've become, the young writers of that town are really, their work is all over the place. You see all of these different events. They've met with the mayor about replanning the city, what's going to come next. The idea is that kids, and especially teenagers, when you're talking about public policy, they have so much to say, they have so many, and they deserve to be heard. Their ideas are sometimes a lot clearer than ours as adults. And what we found out after Parkland is that teenagers have a moral clarity that we don't have so much, and a courage that we sometimes can't equal sometimes. I think the level and purity of their clarity and their idealism. So it started growing. This is in Ireland, started by Roddy Doyle. That's in Dublin. This is in Sydney. This is a space travel supply place. These are all the kids in LA. And this all led, because I kept visiting all of these centers around the world, all of which did it on their own. I would just show up, so we can't take any credit for it. But I kept meeting really gifted young teenagers that were combined. They were writers, but they were activists. And they saw their writing as a way to influence their society and to change what needed to be changed. So we just started thinking, what if we got all these teenagers together? So we created the International Congress of Youth Voices, which happened last summer in San Francisco, and we had Chimamanda Adichie. That was the first one. This is all the kids on the steps of City Hall, right before London Breed was inaugurated. And so they come all the way from Zambia, from Australia, from Syria, Afghanistan, all over the US, Canada, England. And putting them all together was like nuclear fission, it was for them to identify each other and to connect and say and to see their, and to be inspired by each other, and to sort of, it was maybe the most inspiring weekend I've ever seen in my life. And we had Chimamanda Adichie there, and Khaled Hosseini, and Jose Antonio Vargas, and so now we've doubled it, and in 2 weeks it'll happen in San Juan, Puerto Rico, which one of our delegates, who's 15, he said we should have it in San Juan, and that was a year ago. And so now you can imagine what's going on in Puerto Rico. We're like watching the news every day thinking it's either going to be the best educational opportunity for young activists to see, government transition in action by the will of the people, or we're gonna make sure that everybody's safe. And if anyone happens to be in San Juan on August 7th to 11th, come on by.
So they meet each other clearly, and they connect, make new connections. Their worlds open up in new ways. What else do you want to happen from that? What are they putting out into the world?
This is the idea. In the space in between the conventions, we try to make, if you're a newspaper or a television station or a PBS and you want students' voices, about climate change, about gun violence, about robo-grading, right? Yeah. Too often they aren't given a chance to speak. And we're trying to make it easy as a conduit, as a clearinghouse to say, if you want to hear from the young people and the most gifted young voices, come to us and we'll refer you to these young people. And they do it on their own too. So they've been on CNN, they've been in the Times, they've been in newspapers and radio and TV all over the world in the last year. And we're trying to make sure that, because again, like after Parkland, I think we all got woken up like, we had a hunger for that kind of clarity and that kind of passion that we got from David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez and all of the other students there. And I think that it is so good for the soul to hear from them, because everyone's like, that's right. We overcomplicate some things and we forget the essence, and we lose our sense of courageousness. And then we're reminded of it when we hear a 17-year-old speak truth to power. So we're trying to make sure that they're given that platform, and that, and so we're going to keep growing it. But this is the last year we adults are really going to help guide it too much. We're handing it off in San Juan to the alums who are like 20 now. Yeah. So there'll be an election and all this stuff. And so it'll be so much fun to sort of give it to them and then see it grow.
You said, just coming back to yourself for a moment, you said earlier, why put words together unless there's a purpose? Do you think that the time, there's been obviously talk here already in our time together, and it's our culture is this divided moment. Do you feel that there is a different calling or responsibility for the arts and for artists today? Do you feel that personally?
It's hard because I think all the writers and artists and musicians I know, whenever we've seen each other, especially in the early days of this administration, we would say, "What are you doing?" And we would all be almost paralyzed, not knowing where to put our time and energy. Do you quit writing and work for the ACLU? Do you write and try to create, I have friends that created an anthology of ACLU cases, and that raises money for it's been hard to sort of direct your energy. I just wrote sort of another allegory about these last 3 years that takes place on a ship, and it's tentatively called The Unsteady Captain. And it was my way of sort of addressing this in a way, but it's hard to feel useful and it's hard to feel impactful. And, and then I put on my reporting hat. So the story I've been working on the last few weeks is about a woman from Honduras that's been hiding in a church in Richmond, Virginia, because she's facing a final order of deportation. If she goes back to Honduras, she'll be killed by her ex, who threatened her life many times. And so, and she has been under this, and I visited her before in Richmond. But then last week, she was sent a fine by ICE for $297,000 for her time, for exceeding whatever time she was supposed to be here. And they've charged her about $500 a day. Which is like a level of absurdity and kind of cruelty that I don't know if we've ever seen directed at asylum seekers. And so, anyway, I talked to ICE from the Ketchum Library in one of those offices on last Thursday. Surprisingly, they didn't have a lot to say about it. But it's a clear violation of the Eighth Amendment, but it's like the latest thing that it's been really hard to figure out how to direct all of one's energy. And meanwhile, the only thing that really keeps me sane is thinking about these young people who present the only rational hope we have.
And my last question for you, it's something I've never actually been able to ask you, is given all we've talked about here, how do you describe yourself? I mean, are you a writer who does a lot of other things? Are you a guy who does a lot of things and one of them is writing? Is that a stupid question to you?
Yeah, it is. So, two last things. No, can we, because we only got a couple minutes, please, I don't know, you know Jeff as a broadcaster a lot, but please read his poetry too.
Oh, no, come on.
We met because I moderated, I interviewed Jeff for an event in San Francisco celebrating his book of poetry, and I urge you to read it. Do you have it here? Are you going to sign it?
I don't know, but this is characteristic of, I knew if I asked a personal question, he would immediately avoid it.
There's two things I'd like to do in our remaining 3 minutes. One is, it's my father-in-law, Paul's birthday tomorrow.
Oh.
And it's not today. And Vendela will have her event tomorrow. She'll probably ask you to do it again. But can we sing just maybe half of the happy birthday song? And a 1, and a 2. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Paul. Happy birthday to you. All right.
All right, and the last thing is you're going to read.
Do we have time?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so I've been writing picture books for a while. I always wanted to do it as
I'm just noting that you didn't answer my last question, but we did decide that we would end with a short reading.
And so I write picture books, and then the money goes to the Congress, and that's how we get these things happening. But a couple years ago, maybe it was last summer, we saw this house outside of Bellevue. It was for sale. It was this beautiful old house, and we saw the story about it. So we decided to pretend. My father-in-law went. We pretended that we were going to look at it to buy it, and we got in and got to see this beautiful house. And so this is the story of this house, and you guys will recognize some of this. And there might be a few factual things that I'm still working on, but I went to the Haley Museum, Historical Museum, to get as much of it right as I could a few weeks ago. But this is for kids, but you'll get it. There once was a place called Idaho. Oh, actually, this is called Moving the Miller's Mini Moore Mine Mansion. Anybody know what I'm talking about? There once was a place called Idaho. This is for kids around the world. We're introducing this state. In the 1970s, prospectors roamed Idaho looking for gold and silver. In Bellevue, a small town in the bottom half of Idaho, they found silver. Actually, one of the most important finds of all wasn't found by a human, it was found by a dog. This particular dog was chasing a particular gopher or badger. That's unclear, but I'm going to go with gopher. Around when the gopher ducked into a hole, probably his home. The dog did not give up there, though. He dug and dug until into the gopher hole, but instead of finding the gopher, he found silver. Word of the silver spread far and wide, and the small hole the gopher made turned into a much larger hole made by men. The man who owned the mine was named John Minnie Moore, so it became known as the Minnie Moore Mine. A few years later, a man from England, which was and is an island nation quite far from Idaho. I always call England an island nation. I love to. Arrived and bought this island where the dog had chased the gopher, the Minnie Moore Mine. The man who bought the mine was named Henry Miller, and he hoped the mine would still be full of silver and would make him rich. He was not wrong. He got so much silver out of what started as a gopher hole that he had all the silver he needed and became one of the wealthiest men in England or Idaho or both. We can assume that the mine was then known as Miller's Minnie Moore Mine. It only makes sense. But Miller was alone and did not want to be alone. He wanted to be married, so he went looking for a wife. Soon he met a young woman named Annie, and they agreed to marry. Annie had never left the country, had never left Idaho, in fact. So for a wedding present, Henry sent her to Europe so she could see all the history and culture and food, which according to many was better than that which was available in Idaho in 1880. Debatable. While Annie was gallivanting around Europe, which is what you do in Europe, by the way, you gallivant. It is a kind of traipsing. Henry was determined to build his new wife a lavish new home. When she got back, he had built her a large Victorian house in a town called Bellevue. It was the most impressive and stately mansion for miles. It had 3 floors and high ceilings and stained glass windows. In a region where many people were still living in small shacks and even tents, this home brought a bit of old world civility to the Old West, which is often not so civil. The home, we can assume, was known to some, if not all, as Miller's Minnie Moore Mine Mansion. Henry and Annie lived there happily for years and soon enough welcomed a son, Douglas, who played along the riverside. The house was on the riverside, mind you, and rode horses on the vast open land around the home. There was no better place for horses than Idaho. Any horse will tell you that. They are truthful animals and are especially truthful when it comes to real estate. But sadness came to Miller's Minnie Moore Mine Mansion. Soon after the turn of the century, Henry died, leaving Annie and Douglas alone. Then things got worse. Annie was taken in by a crooked banker who convinced her to put all her money in his bank. Then the bank went bankrupt, and Annie and Douglas had nothing but their home. Annie needed to find a way to make money, so she did what most of us might do in that situation. She decided to raise pigs. With her last few dollars, she bought a bunch of pigs and planned to breed and sell them. But there was one catch. The town of Bellevue did not allow its residents to keep livestock in their yards. There is, some say, a particular smell to cows and pigs and sheep, and that smell is not considered wonderful. So Annie had to make a choice. Either she would stay in Bellevue, in the home her beloved lost husband built for her, or she would leave with her pigs, the only way to provide for her son. In the end, she decided she didn't need to choose. See, your narrator just tricked you. Annie decided to simply move the house from Bellevue to a spot just outside town, which had no prohibitions on porcine pursuits. Your narrator just said it was simple to move the house, but it was not simple, it was very complicated. Here's what Annie Miller did, with, of course, the help of her son and the workers they hired. The house had been assembled atop a foundation made of hundreds of stones, and the first thing the workers did was to draw numbers on every one of these stones. Why? Don't ask why. You will soon learn. You will learn soon enough. After numbering all the stones, they removed them carefully while replacing them with enormous logs. Why would they replace the stones with logs? This I can tell you right now, because logs roll. Yes, Annie Miller and her son and the workers they hired actually planned to roll the house 4 miles down the road to a place where pigs were acceptable and accepted. And this is what they did. They placed about a dozen logs under the house. They attached the house to a team of horses. These horses pulled the house as the logs rolled underneath. This actually happened. When the house moved about 6 feet, the workers moved the logs from the back of the house to the front, and it all started over again. Again and again, they rolled and replaced. The move took about a month, and the ride was so smooth that Annie and Douglas were able to live in the house all the while. They actually did. They even had a cook who cooked 3 meals a day for them in the house, in the kitchen, which was rolling down the road. The pigs, we assume, followed along behind. When the house finally arrived at the new site on a large plot of land by the Big Wood River, which was and is a real river in Idaho, the workers reassembled the stone foundation exactly as it had been before. How? Using the numbers they'd drawn on the stones, of course. Idahoans are smart. Then they placed the house atop the stones, and it was precisely as it had been before, only 4 miles away and surrounded by pigs. The Miller's Minnie Moore Mine Mansion stood there for years. In fact, it still stands there today and Annie and Douglas lived and thrived there for many years, as did the pigs, until, of course, they were eaten. The end. That's how it goes.
Dave Eggers.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you all.